Hey everybody, welcome to 2006. This is VTS11? That's 11? Wow, alright guys. Almost a year we've been doing this. To all you new guys who joined this month, welcome aboard. Those free videos I gave you didn't have this ugly face on there, but that's something I started around video 3 or 4. Was doing some intros and just using some video lecture. So this is me, I'm Keith. Good to have you guys. For you guys who've been here for a while, good to have you back. I hope everybody had a great holiday break. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Festivus, whatever it is you're into. Hope you had a great one. Hope you had a great New Year. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to do this year in 2006. I'm going to have a great time. We're going to start moving into more acting stuff now as we get into this year. We've gone through the 2 big pieces of animation, posing and timing. We've broke down a lot of different things in there. And so what I want to start doing in 2006 is start moving into some of the higher level stuff of acting and screen space usage and the motivations of characters and the real storytelling aspect of animation, because when you get right down to it, animation is to tell a story. I mean, I suppose you can make stuff move just to make it move, but after a while that gets pretty dull. Audiences got tired of that around 1922. So we need to tell a story. We need to be able to have our characters act and emote and get their thoughts and feelings shown and make them feel alive. And that's what we all strive for. That's what we all want in our work. And so I'm going to start digging into this stuff. And I'll be honest with you, we're getting into stuff that I feel a lot more comfortable talking about. I mean, talking about principles and talking about, what's the best way to do an arc, or what's the best way to do this, or, these technical things. After a while, they just stop meaning a whole lot to me. They become tools, but in and of themselves, they're not rules. They're just things to help me communicate the stuff that we're going to get into, which is talking all about our characters acting. But this month, we're going to go over a couple of things. One thing that I feel like is helpful to understand is to see how these principles can be applied to get you differences in style of motion. And so this month, we're going to take a look at a simple little bouncing ball. And we're going to see how we can use, just by changing some of the application of our timings or of our poses or how our phrasing works, we can go from fairly realistic to cartoony. And we're going to start peeling back what is behind this idea of cartoony. What's the point? What's the best way to use it? What's advantageous? What's disadvantageous? Another thing we're going to look at is screen space. We did some talking about staging, about how to stage actions, but now here I want to talk this month a bit more about how to use characters as a whole inside the screen space and also interacting with each other, because the best stories are about characters motivating characters. And so I want to talk some major broad strokes about how you deal with characters interacting with each other and how they motivate each other and how different things on the screen can give you different feels and different understandings and say different things about your characters. So we're going to get into that, and some of you may say, well, I want to study animation. What are you telling me about screen space and all this stuff? Isn't that for layout? Well, a lot of times animators are their own layout. I've worked many jobs where I was given just a storyboard and a bunch of assets, and I said, make a camera, make the characters, and make it work. So I think it's important for animators to know what these things are all about so that they can use them to push their stuff even farther. So anyways, before we dawdle too much longer on the front end of this stuff, really great to be here again, and let's hop right into it. Okay, cartoony. What's the point? I mean, there's 2 basic camps to a lot of CG animators. It seems that you have folks who like creature animation, who like things super realistic, and they like things that are, like folks who like motion capture really respond to, ooh, look at the subtleties of movement there, and look at all the little bits here, and there's a certain responsiveness to that from some people. Well, other people are like, well, that's reality, it's boring, I'm not interested in that. I'd rather do something stylized, something fun, something different, something that has a filter on it, that's more of expression of the life or the energy of the character, and not so much just a recreation. It's the old rotoscope versus not rotoscope battles. I'm not here to tell you one's better than the other. I am here to tell you, though, that personally, I like to see animation that is run through the mind and the heart of the animator. Otherwise, we should just use the camera. Okay? If we're not going to use the mind and the heart of the animator to express certain unspoken yet visual realities about who our characters are, then there's really not much of a point to animate things. There's a reason why a lot of the animated features these days are kind of going towards talking animals, because people don't want to do talking people in animation, because there's a certain sense of why bother. It's the conundrum of Final Fantasy or Polar Express or these other things that, regardless of what you think of them as films, there's a certain not quite with it on the motion, because people feel like, well, why bother? Why did we bother making these photorealistic human beings and then motion capturing them and then putting them into photorealistic environments? I mean, other than the scientific fun of it, was there a reason to animate things? And I think it's important for us in CG to remember that the heritage of animation is a heritage of filtering. Okay, filtering is my way of saying, say something from your heart, from your mind. Take the world around us, like all great artists do. Take this world and run it through who you are as a person and say something specific, unique, and different. Because if we're just going to go around and take snapshots, then we can do that with any camera. Okay, it's really important, I think, for us as animators to understand how we can take principles and within a wide continuum of style, leaning towards realistic, softer, motion-y, creature type stuff, all the way over to crazy Warner Brothers super squash and stretch kind of stuff. The continuum runs a rather long way, but in there's still a lot of room for expression. So what am I getting at? The thing I'm getting at is that in order to be able to work anywhere along that continuum, you have to understand how to use the principles that we've been talking about and the various tools that we've been talking about, and work the motion one way or the other by manipulating the timings or the phrasings or the spacings or the poses or the arcs or the anticipations to varying degrees. Because on this continuum from realistic to super cartoony, all of these things always exist. These are principles of motion that are always existing. The question is, to what degree do you push them? Okay? And one of the bugaboos that I had as an earlier animator was that I was very good at snappy style, and kind of got to be known for a guy who could do snappy style. But I kept on getting these jobs and these projects where I would have to do something a little softer than that. My personal way of going is just like, yeah, let's go a little nuts. Let's have some fun with it. But a lot of times the client will say, yeah, but I'm not really into that. Or the style of the motion had to match the style of the visuals, so the textures and the lighting were realistic, and you couldn't really, start playing taffy games with the characters, so you have to start thinking more in terms of a realistic look. And you have, as a professional animator, it's your responsibility to know how to work along this continuum. So what I want to do is I want us to go through this scene that I have, and it's just a real simple bouncing ball. We're going to get real basic level here. Hopefully you're not feeling like you're getting ripped off. But I'm going to go through and take this bouncing ball, which is fairly realistic looking. It's not a realistic bouncing ball, but it's fairly realistic looking. And I'm going to go through and we're going to tweak a few things along the way, and we're going to turn it into something cartoonier, and you're going to see what we're tweaking and why we're tweaking it. Because the big thing to remember, the difference between realistic and cartoony, the goal of pushing things in this more filtered, more artistic, more interpretive fashion is to make things seem more alive than real. Okay, I'll say that again in case you need to let that work it through. The goal in animation is to make things more alive than real. If we want real, I could take this camera, go out and film my neighbors walking down the street. It's about as entertaining as watching the grass grow. we want something that feels alive. In order to make it feel alive from the inside out, we have to push things a little bit. We have to take reality and torque it and use it and twist it and turn it the way we want. Still maintain that believability. Believability is key. But believability and realistic, I think, are two completely different things. Realistic, photorealism, realism in motion, there are projects that demand that and need it, and we have to know how to use it. And a lot of times video reference is great for that stuff. And then there's something else. So anyways, enough of me babbling. Let's get in and we'll take a look at this bouncing ball thing, and we'll walk our way through it and see what we learn. Okay, here's our scene with our bouncing ball. Let's take a look at this real quick. Nothing crazy. It's just a ball. All right, I'm not even putting any spin on it, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of a fairly mundane physical reaction, and that's a lot what realistic animation is just physical reactions. Cartoon animation tends to be more about intentionality. What we have in realism is things happening mainly for physical reasons. There are what I would call macro motivations. I'm going to stand up out of the chair. And then there are micro motivations, which is all the different little things that happen inside of a body that are necessary to accomplish my macro motivation. So my macro motivation is I want to get out of the chair. The micro motivation is I have to shift my weight forward. I have to flex my arms. I have to put my hands on the armrest, and the elbows will go out in order to support the weight as I push myself up. The calf muscles will fire. There will be all kinds of shifting of muscles and things like that in order to get myself in balance so that when I stand up, I don't fall over. These are all things that we don't consciously think of. And realism and realistic motion is a lot about just the physical reactions that we don't intentionally do, but are part of a larger intention. Cartoon animation filters a lot of that stuff out, boils away all those things, and almost everything is some kind of an expression of intentionality. Now, there are going to always be these unintentional biomechanical mechanisms in order to allow us to accomplish things, but there's going to be less noise, as it were, and more direct intentionality. So let's take a look at this bouncing ball. If we take a look at the Y translate, we'll see it's just a simple decaying bounce, nothing special. There's no value to it one way or the other. It's just a decaying bouncing ball. Okay? Very simple, very easy to understand. So let's play around with the timing. Now, it's too generalized, it's too simplistic to say that, well, cartoon timing is faster. No, that's not necessarily true. Cartoon timing is exaggerated, either faster or slower. The difference is that cartoon timing is just not perfectly realistic. And to prove a point, let me go ahead and just make all of these things just a little bit longer. I'll make my scene a few frames longer, give myself some room. I'll actually add time to this thing so that when it does its bounce, it actually takes longer. And I have to fix some of these things, but oops, split. I just have to fix my tangencies here so that I don't get some funkiness into the motion. By stretching these things out, now let's see what happens. We've added something to it that just by adding those frames, it's taken it away from that sense of realistic, and now it feels filtered. Now it feels like, wait, there's something going on here. It's almost added just that one simple little thing, just added some life to it. I mean, isn't that crazy? And let's undo all that stuff. And we'll go the other direction. So we'll undo all the little time shifts we did, and we'll make things shorter. Okay? So, we'll take a couple frames out of this. And one more. Alright. And
and shift that and that. So what we're doing, I suppose I could just scale this for you and you can get a sense of it. But what I'm doing is I'm going in the other direction now. Again, there's something more to it. It's not just reality here. We're pushing a little bit. So by pushing the timing, we get a different feel. So let's keep this timing, okay? Just because I like it. Let's take a look at the spacing then, okay? Spacing, remember, is how you get from point A to point B. These curves right here, all of these curves indicate spacing. So this is a fairly simplistic, very even spacing. There's a little bit going on here, but let's go ahead and exaggerate that a little bit. Okay, so we'll get into things and we'll change our eases and our cushions, and we'll make a little faster in, faster out. And by going faster in, faster out, we're going to just change the characteristics of the motion just a tiny little bit. Okay? So what's that look like? We're already starting to really push away from something. Now we're getting something that's got a kind of a fun energy to it. Just by hanging these things up in the air, getting them up in the air a little bit faster and hanging them there a little bit longer. So we played with our spacing a little bit, and we've got something a little more distinct, a little more different. Now, one thing I don't have in here is I don't have any squash and stretch, but I'll get to that in a little bit because I want to show you that's going to be fairly complex, how we play with that, and I don't want to confuse things just yet. So by changing your spacing, you get these more exaggerated groupings of things happening. The timing is the same, but what we did is we got up in the air faster and we come down out of it faster, and we rely on the easing of these things to soften some things up, but it just indicates a certain level of intentionality. We're stripping away mere physical reactions and we're starting to make things happen for reasons, okay? Like we want something here behind this. So that's if we change our spacing. Now let's go ahead and push our poses, okay? So let's get into that. So let's say we make this guy bounce higher than he probably physically ought to, so it feels as if this ball is going to be doing things it's not really supposed to be doing. And of course we'll play around and try and maintain that crazy spacing we had before. So by bouncing higher, by changing the pose, we are now starting to give this thing a sense of intentionality, because physically he's not going to bounce that high and then decay that quickly, okay? That's not something that's going to happen like that. And I'll probably take this guy up a little bit too. Alright, and then take him, break, and like so. So now we're kind of making this thing just again on the fly, changing one thing at a time. We're starting to add some life to it. We're starting to add some intentionality to it just by changing and pushing these poses, pushing the poses a little bit higher than they would normally go in a physical universe. Okay, so that's by changing our poses. We can push these things around, and that's going to happen in a character as well. A guy may lean back to anticipate and shift his weight in a move to grab the glass of water, and in realism that's going to be almost barely perceptible. It's going to be there, it has to be there, but that anticipation will be softer and won't be anywhere near as broad. But in cartoony, you can push that anticipation and even hold it and make it goofy almost. And the guy can reach for the glass of water, and now you're starting to put some life into it. You're seeing life through a filter, and again, we're trying to make it more alive than real. Okay? So we can get that same sort of thing with anticipations. Let's go ahead and play with our phrasing a little bit. Phrasing, remember, is just how you get into things. Now, when you take a look at the timings of these things, phrasing is going to mean we're going to have a different characteristic to how things bounce. So Maybe he bounces and he holds up in the air, and then there's a quick bounce, and then a smaller one. Okay, so we're going to, on the fly, make this up as I go along. And didn't want that one. Wanted those. This last little bounce will be fairly longish. Make sure we don't get too crazy with our spacings right there. And then we want this bounce to be quick. And we want this first bounce to have a different flavor to it. Okay? So then we take that, and we take that, and we take that. So now we've changed our phrasing. Let's see what happens when we do that. That's totally not real. But there's something going on there. I don't like it that much. But you see, just by changing the phrasing of something, if some bounces are longer than others, we mix it up, we start pushing things. Now, this is a pretty crappy example of just making up some kind of a phrasing on the fly. But you see, by changing this one, in fact, the reason why it's cruddy is because that middle pose really just isn't very good at all. It's too much. So maybe if we try that little adjustment, now we've got something that works. So now it feels like this thing is doing something on its own, right? So by changing the phrasing and pushing the poses and all that stuff, we give ourselves even more intentionality. Okay? So now let's get into another part. Let's go ahead and start pushing some squash and stretch on this thing. So far there hasn't been any squash and stretch in this at all. So let me start playing with some of these ideas of squash and stretch. So we'll do a little bit of this. So, and let's go ahead and while we're here, let's go ahead and add one other level to what we're doing, which is maybe some level of anticipation. Okay, so what I've done is he's on the ground, and then he's going to hold on the ground for a frame, and then he's going to come back up. Now I'll have to fix a lot of that stuff later, so just watch what I'm doing, and if you can follow along, I'll try and talk my way through it. So he's going to stretch, and he's on the ground. He's going to squash down into that. And I'll also translate down a little bit farther. Okay, and then when he comes back out of that, it's going to stretch again. Okay. All right. So there's some junk happening down there. You'll see it in the translate Y. We gotta kind of flat. Oops, didn't want to do that. You take this guy right there. No, not scale. There we go. Okay. And then get our spacing back over here again, like we had. Okay, see what we did there? And I won't fill out the rest of these. We're just going to concentrate on this first bounce, so it's simple to follow. Okay, maybe the second bounce too. All right. So we'll take and we'll just repeat that process again. When he's right there, do a nice stretch. We'll take him up. We'll take all those keys, slide them over. Take this guy, hold him on the ground for one, and we'll just take all this stuff back to one so I can see what I'm looking at. Squash him again, push him down to the ground again, take these things, fix them again, okay, and then fix the spacing again on that. And when he comes up. Of course, he's going to squash up again, or stretch up again, so take and stretch him. And we'll undo that fun little bit of spacing we did before so that this thing has some room to play on this, or sorry, on the phrasing. Alright. And so now I could keep playing this out and fill out the entire thing, but you're seeing that now by adding some squash and stretch, we're adding some more intentionality to it. Now, I could have had some minor squash and stretch on this when I first opened it, but it would have been very, very small, like maybe less than 3% of squashing and stretching. But by adding that, we're really starting to build in some real personality to it. And we can, at the top of this, flatten them out again and just really give this thing a whole new life of its own. And it's been built off of a basic bounce by pushing a few things around. So that's what happens if you, that's like taking these poses and pushing them even more. And this guy right there, we can really give him some sense of intentionality up there. Well, I don't want to get into it, but you get the idea. That now it's taking on a life all its own. Now, I didn't finish it out. I did this on the fly, right in front of your very eyes, so it's kind of cruddy. But you kind of get the sense that if you take these same principles that we've been talking about and just push them, you make things more alive than real. And that's the beauty of animation. That's what great animation really has to it. It has the ability to be more alive than real. Live action cinema is beautiful. It has its place. It's a great tool. But animation, I think, sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater, especially in CG. In our chase to make things as real as possible so that we can wow each other, we're losing a bit of our soul. And so I like the idea of making things more living than real. Because by making them living, by making them believable, by making them motivational, they become more real than real. That's the greatness of animation, and I like to see us get back into it. But that's just me. I don't want to tell everybody else what to do, and there's plenty of clients who don't want us to do that. So we just need to know how to play with these principles and get from point A to point B. So hopefully that was helpful to you, and you'll start looking at your own work and start thinking how you can push the timing, the phrasing, the spacing, the poses. Start pushing in some more intentionality into things, some more greater anticipations. You know, just look at how you can push these things and make them even more living than they are. Bring some of your soul to it.
Okay, hopefully that was useful and helpful to you guys. Hopefully you learned something cool and fun and different. Next up, I want to talk about how we move through screen space and how we use character interdynamics. A lot of the stuff that I've exhibited in the past or talk about has been in isolation, where we're going to talk about a particular principle. We show it on one character, on how timing affects weight. We do it with one character. And to study these particular principles, we have to burrow down to the individual like that. But storytelling is about people interacting with people. And so it's good for us to have a refresher about how to stage characters in such a way as to invite the audience in or put the audience back. Because really, as storytellers, as animators and storytellers, what we want to try and do is we want to try and manipulate the audience's involvement or level of invitation into a particular character. Now, ultimately, you have to, as a storyteller, you have to decide who your characters are that are more important, and you let your audience see the world through their eyes and feel the world through their heart. And there's ways to do that with how you stage your characters. And a lot of times, if we're not careful or we're not thinking, a lot of this stuff is really, I'm going to say right now, a lot of this stuff is instinct. Good animators generally have this by instinct. They kind of know, well, that's feeling a little closed off, or that's feeling, I need to stage that better. But it's good for us to understand and to study why something feels closed or distant. and why something feels open or draws the audience in, why we relate to this character more than we relate to that character. It helps us understand so that when we get to these troubling spots and troublesome spots in our own work, we can kind of diagnose it and say, okay, I'm not connecting with him or her or it. Why? Okay, let me take a look at how I'm staging them to the camera. Now, like I said in my intro, a lot of times people say, well, that's just layout's job, or that's storyboard's job. Actually, I would say that it's the animator's job. It's the animator's job to understand how to use screen space and to use it. I mean, when you're developing your poses, when you're developing your thoughts, your ideas, your how your character is going to move through a scene, how they're going to act that scene out. A lot of times a storyboard panel is just a panel and two heads talking. And maybe they'll fill in a few more, depends on the kind of project you have, depends on the budget you have. But it might be a locked off camera and you just have two characters talking for 10 seconds. Well, 10 seconds, if you don't do anything with two characters sitting on a screen 10 seconds, other than just have them say their lines and move their heads around and flap their arms, it's going to feel really cheap. So what can we do as animators to understand how to move things in? So let me go through a couple of examples for you and show you just some basic different things, and then you can start playing around with some things on your own. And after we're done with that, I'm going to come back. I'm going to do some chalkboard work as far as how to work in some larger concepts that are quicker to just for me to draw out. So let's take a look at just some real quick examples, and then we'll come back out and we'll do some whiteboard work.
What I want to talk about in this section is opening and closing relationships between characters and between characters and the audience. It's important for us to realize that beyond just pose and gesture, that screen space is a magnificently powerful tool of telling a story, of bringing emotion to the scene. Let's take a look at this first scene. This first scene shows two characters. These two characters share a common space before them. The character space is oftentimes associated with the area in front of their own face. So these guys have their faces sharing a common space, and we as the audience, or whoever we are supposed to see the world through, whose eyes we see the world through, we are included in this activity. So these two characters, their line of action play together, they share a common space, we're in there. This is a very open, wide open kind of thing. There's no secret, there's no mystery here, it's open. You'll see that a lot of times children's shows are staged like this because we want children to feel safe, so we make everything open to them. Now, let's say we want to close off the audience. So we keep the same poses, but we put the camera around the other side. Now we've closed off the audience. Or, if the audience is supposed to see the world through a particular character's eyes, we close off that character and we associate with that character. So let's say the first image was there's three buddies and we see the world through buddy, that isn't on screen. So these are his two friends and they're all happy and they're ready to go to a party or something. Now we go and now we see the world through the first guy's point of view, and these are two friends but they're kind of making fun of him. Okay? So it's the same pose. There's nothing different about the poses between those two shots, just where we put the camera. And by where we put the camera has a different emotional meaning. Okay, so let's say we start with a different scenario. These two characters are talking, and say we're supposed to associate with the blue character more. Well, here we don't have that sense of we belong one to one or the other. It's a very open moment. But let's say in this conversation, somewhere along the line, the blue character has something he's not really terribly proud of, or maybe he doesn't want to talk about. So what we can use is the screen depth and step the blue character forward, leaving the green character where they were. Now what we've done is we've taken the blue character and he's closed off the green character, but he's still open to the audience. So the audience is now drawn into that blue character's moment, that space. And we associate with that person more because we're invited and we're still in that person's common space. The other guy's been closed off because all he can see is the back of the guy's head. So this is great for building tension or mystery or drama into what we're doing. And sometimes you'll get a shot in the storyboard will be just a two shot and there's no screen depth indication whatsoever. But instead of just doing a sad face and drooping the shoulders and dipping the head for a guy who is, maybe not so sure he wants to talk about something, step him forward. Close off relationships. And by closing off those relationships, now your scene has a lot more power. And let's say this guy finally gets the courage to turn up and tell the other guy what he's talking about. So he turns around, and now we're not included. Now it's our turn to see the green character's response, and we go to the green character and we're open to them, but the other guy's closed to us. So you see what I'm saying? You start playing with these relationships. Okay, let's go to another idea. We have two characters. They're relatively the same size on screen. Their eye levels are the same, and they have a same or a similar point of focus. So they're engaged in a moment. Now let's say we're supposed to deal with, again, with the blue character more. So we want to draw him closer to screen. So the blue character steps forward, but by keeping the eye levels the same, we notice that we haven't necessarily excluded the green character as much as we could if we dropped him in screen. Let's say we drop him in screen, and so as the blue character steps forward, we do a truck down or something like that. I mean, you can play with the relationships between these guys, and screen height has a difference, screen size has a difference, Z depth has a difference, closing off a character, opening up a character. All these things are tools in our tool set to help us bring emotion and bring the audience into a point of view. We need to think about how our characters interact with each other and how they interact with the audience. And by opening and closing these relationships, just by position, and if you guys are making short films, this is really good stuff to think about and push it even farther.
Okay, back here. Now I'm going to draw some things. Hopefully that stuff was helpful to you. Now I want to talk about some other things about contrast, okay, how we're going to play this space. I could go through and pose it out, but it's really quick for me to draw it. And so I'm going to go through and do some things here with you. One of the first things I want to talk about is two characters and the back and forth of managing screen space. Now a lot of times you're going to have, if you have two characters, you have one and you have two. Okay, I probably should draw these guys nice and dark for you. Okay, so you have these two characters, and they kind of have their space on the screen, all right? Now, one of the things you can do is you can expand, and think of this as territory. So if we take this screen, and we kind of divide it in half on a two-shot, and this guy has his pieces, and this guy has his pieces. What you can do in a scene that has a lot of conflict is you can take this character and have him invade, cross over the other guy's space in a very confrontational sort of way. And so what you have is he's crossed over the middle of the screen, and by doing that, he's expanded his territory, okay? By expanding his territory, he's shrinking this guy's territory. And unless this guy's spoiling for a fight, he's going to respond accordingly. So as characters trade this territory, maybe this guy right here backs off a bit. Okay? And so he's invading his space, and this guy backs off and starts retreating. And now you notice that the dividing line between their space has shifted. And you can do this, and I mean, it's not as powerful if you have a guy over here pointing and gesturing, and this guy over here sitting there and responding, but not really. A scene has a lot more energy to it if you start taking territory and giving up territory. And then this scene becomes really powerful if we reverse this scenario. So this guy's leaning forward, this guy's going back. Now let's say that he says something and this guy's just like, all right, that's enough, I've had enough. So we can back the whole thing up. You like my eraser? So maybe this guy responds and retorts, and watch any good scene of tension and see if you can see this happening in other movies or other things you see. So maybe this guy has just had enough, and he comes back over and reclaims his space and pushes this guy back. And so you can, in this back and forth, It's not just enough to just have guys do their poses in their space. Have them take territory back and forth. And then, to get the ultimate in confrontation, is the two of them are trying like crazy to take over the other guy's space. And so now you've got this conflict, okay? So think of that in terms of just this guy expands his territory, he expands his territory. So when you have characters that are trying to, really negotiate, and this doesn't always have to happen in fights. Okay, this can happen in conversations about ideas. This can happen in conversations about just about anything. You can have a character who's trying to be friendly to another character, and another character is trying to be closed. And maybe the one who's friendly is going to step over that screen boundary as a way to kind of pull that person in, or at least go fetch them. You know what I mean? So think in terms of how you can take this idea of expanding a character's screen territory, taking other screen territory, invading the space of another. Don't just have characters do poses in a spot and then another character do poses in a spot, but have them move across the battlefield of the screen and take that position from another. And in this way, your scenes are going to pop. They're going to be a lot more effective when you have these scenes of great negotiation. And like I said, it doesn't always have to happen in an argument or a negative environment. It could be a positive one. It could be a guy encouraging another guy, let's go. The treasure's over there, let's go get it. And maybe he gets into guy's space. We do this all the time. Whenever we want to get our point across, whenever we want to get the other person out of a position of resistance or distance, and we want to go get them. So we go get them, not physically grabbing them and pulling them, although sometimes we'll do that too. There's all these kinds of neat gestures that we'll do that we don't even think about, where we tap a person on the arm. It's like, come on. And we'll do this. It's all an effort to move into their territory and pull them out. And so hopefully this was helpful to you. And when you're thinking of these scenes and you've got these really neat scenes to work on, start digging in. Thinking about, okay, besides just poses, what kind of screen space management can I have here so that my characters in this scene comes alive? Hey guys, that's the end of this month. I'm really glad you're here. Again, you new folks, welcome aboard. I hope this was cool. I hope you learned something. Next month, we're digging in really deep. We're going to jump in right up to our waist in acting, starting with how to break down a scene. And we're going to go from the moment you get a handoff of here's a piece of dialogue, here's some storyboards, what do you do now? I'm going to take us right through, and this is going to be a lot more just, it's not going to be so much, here's some principles of animation, but more of, here's a scene, here's how I handle this scene, and we're going to start unfolding how I approach stuff. And I think just by you seeing me do it and me talking through my process, it will help us to see just one way of approaching things. Now, a lot of people do things different ways, and I'm going to try and cover the broad spectrum of how you get into a scene and how you do it, because every scene's different. And that's why I'm going to go through several scenes, and we're going to start breaking them down. We're going to start talking about things. So what we're going to do starting next month is we're going to get an example, a shot. Actually, it's going to be a shot from my short film that I'm doing. So you guys get to see it develop right in front of your very eyes, or at least a few shots of it. And what we'll do is we'll take this scene and we'll hold on to this scene for probably a couple of months at least. And in this couple of months, I'll go through and I'll show you all the things that I'm thinking of when I break down what's going on. And we'll start talking and bringing out these performance things. How do I plan a scene? How do I break down the dialogue? How do I figure out the timing? How do I figure out character interactions? How do I figure out what's going on? And so it's going to be cool stuff. I've been looking forward to doing this part of the VTS since I started. Everything I've been doing up to this point has been getting everybody on the same page, talking through some basic core issues so that I could get to the point I'm going to get to next month, and then we can all just start digging in and having a lot of fun, because I really love that part of animation. My favorite part of animation is the moment they give you a new scene. And from that point until I get it blocked, I'm in heaven. I love it. It's so exciting because you're just dealing with this raw thing. And all you have is that moment. And it's up to you. I mean, right there, all the possibilities are there. And it's up to you as the animator, me as the animator, to dig into the soul of that character and bring them out and make them alive. Everything after blocking is technical work, okay, which is good, and some people really find their fun there, and I like it too, but nowhere near as much as this stuff. So anyways, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. It's exciting. It's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. So thanks so much for being a part of this. Quick little reminder to all you folks, I did go to Brazil last month. We saw some amazing things. We saw some wonderful opportunities to help people. I don't have time this month to give you a full report on that stuff. Sorry. Next month I'm going to try and squeeze something in, or I might just make a separate video and send out an email to everybody. If you're interested, you can download it and check it out. I got some video of some things that we're trying to do down there in Brazil with the funds from the video tutorial service. So anyways, I just want to thank you again for being a part of it. I want to thank you for your kindness and for your encouragement. The feedback is great. You guys are great. I'm having a blast. Hopefully you all are learning something, because this stuff's cool. Anyways, that's enough for this month. All the best, and God bless you, and be good to each other.